For over 2,000 years, a mushroom growing on the rotting wood of ancient forests was considered so rare, so powerful, and that ordinary people were forbidden from consuming it. It was called lingzhi in China, the herb of spiritual potency. In Japan, it was called reishi, the mushroom of immortality. Emperors sent expeditions into remote mountains to find it. Taoist monks sought it as a path to enlightenment. It was painted into silk scrolls, carved into palace doorways, and depicted in classical art as a symbol of divine favour and long life. And today you can buy it on Amazon for 15 quid. But here's the strange thing. The reason ancient civilizations revered this mushroom and its effect on energy, immunity, longevity, and the mind is now being studied by laboratories around the world. And what researchers are finding is forcing them to ask an uncomfortable question. Because in the battle against Alzheimer's, a disease that has consumed $42 billion in research funding and produced almost nothing, could a 2,000-year-old mushroom be pointing us towards the answer? Before we understand why reishi is interesting, we need to understand why modern medicine has failed so completely when it comes to Alzheimer's. And that story starts with one of the biggest scientific scandals of our lifetime. In 2006, a neuroscientist named Sylvain Lesné published a paper in Nature that appeared to crack the central mystery of Alzheimer's disease. He claimed to have isolated a specific form of amyloid protein that directly caused memory loss in rats. This was the first time anyone had shown a cause and effect relationship between amyloid and the disease. The paper was celebrated. Annual support for studies looking at amyloid and Alzheimer's rose from near zero to 287 million by 2021. It's been estimated that $42 billion was spent on over 1,000 clinical trials between 1995 and 2001, and every single one of those trials has failed. And then in 2022, a whistleblower named Matthew Schrag began examining the images in Lesné's paper. What he found was described by microbiologist Elizabeth Bick, who helped confirm his findings, as a severe breach of scientific integrity that led many other studies in the wrong direction and caused false hope among patients and their families. The paper was eventually retracted and the field was left facing a question it could no longer avoid. What if the plaques were never the cause? What if they were just a symptom? Here is what the most forward-thinking Alzheimer's researchers now believe. The brain, accounting for approximately 2% of the adult body weight, consumes over 20% of the body's energy under physiological conditions. Your neurons are the most energy-demanding cells you own. They never sleep, they never stop firing, and they have almost no capacity to store reserves. Unlike muscles, which can store excess carbohydrates, the brain needs to be constantly supplied with oxygen and energy. If the blood supply to the brain is disrupted, neurons start shutting down within seconds. This means that the brain, more than any other organ, is vulnerable to metabolic failure. And what we now see consistently in early stages of Alzheimer's, before the plaques, before the tangles, before any cognitive symptoms at all, is precisely that. PET studies show that glucose uptake is 10 to 12% lower in key brain regions of patients with mild cognitive impairment, with it becoming more widespread as Alzheimer's progresses. The brain is running out of fuel, and the drivers of that energy failure are the same metabolic dysfunctions that cause type 2 diabetes, so insulin resistance, mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, and oxidative stress. Lowered glucose uptake and mitochondrial dysfunction are associated with Alzheimer's, and type 2 diabetes is now considered a particular type of Alzheimer's pathology. Some researchers even call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. Cutting-edge researchers now say that Alzheimer's is a metabolic brain disease. The amyloid plaques and the tau tangles, they're not the fire, they're the smoke. The debris of metabolic change that started years, sometimes decades earlier. Now here is what makes reishi remarkable. Because when you list the specific metabolic failures that drive Alzheimer's, and then look at what reishi's bioactive compounds are documented to do, something striking appears, because they line up almost perfectly. So let's go through them one by one. Neuroinflammation is now understood as one of the primary engines of Alzheimer's progression. It's not the acute inflammation you feel from an injury, it's the chronic, low-grade fire burning in the brain, consuming energy, destroying neurons, and accelerating the very cognitive decline it is partly caused by. Recent pharmacological studies have confirmed the significant anti-neuroinflammatory properties and immunomodulatory effects of reishi. Specifically, reishi suppresses the NLRP3 inflammasome, which is the molecular trigger that initiates and sustains this chronic brain inflammation. This is the same pathway that pharmaceutical companies have spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying and largely failing to target with synthetic drugs. Reishi does it through its polysaccharides and triterpenes, the same compounds that the Taoist monks were consuming a millennium before NLRP3 inflammasome was even discovered. Amyloid and tau still matter. They're not the root cause, but once the metabolic crisis begins, they accelerate the destruction. Reishi extracts and isolated compounds can inhibit amyloid beta production, promote amyloid beta clearance, and protect neurons from amyloid beta-induced toxicity. The key active compound here is ganoderic acid A, one of Reishi's signature triterpenes, which has been shown to promote amyloid clearance through autophagy. Autophagy is the brain's own cellular housekeeping system, the mechanism by which neurons clear out damaged proteins before they accumulate. Rather than stripping out plaques with a synthetic drug, the approach that costs $42 billion and produce nothing, Reishi appears to help the brain's own cleanup systems work more effectively. Oxidative stress is what happens when the brain's energy systems are overwhelmed and begin generating damaging free radicals faster than they can be neutralized. It's one of the earliest markers of Alzheimer's pathology. Reishi is one of the most potent natural antioxidants ever studied. Its polysaccharides and phenolic compounds actively scavenge free radicals and protect mitochondrial membranes from the oxidative damage that accelerates neuronal death. Mitochondrial dysfunction, the failure of the brain's cellular power plants, is now considered one of the earliest events in Alzheimer's development, appearing before any clinical symptoms. Deficiencies in energy metabolism have been shown to be one of the earliest events in Alzheimer's disease pathology, as researchers from ACU Banner Neurodegenerative Disease Research Center put it. Reishi's polysaccharides have demonstrated mitochondrial protective effects in multiple studies, helping maintain their energy production capacity of neurons under stress. But perhaps the most surprising place where Reishi interacts with cutting-edge Alzheimer's research is somewhere where most people wouldn't think to look. Not in the brain, but in the gut. In 2023, researchers at University College Cork published a study in Brain, one of the most prestigious neurology journals in the world, that changed the way many scientists think about Alzheimer's. The study showed that the memory impairments in people with Alzheimer's could be transferred to young, healthy animals through a transplant of gut microbiota. Now let that settle for a moment. They took gut bacteria from Alzheimer's patients and transplanted them into young rats with no signs of cognitive decline, and those rats developed memory problems. These animals with gut bacteria from people with Alzheimer's produced fewer new nerve cells in the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, and also showed impaired memory. Alzheimer's patients had a higher abundance of inflammation-promoting bacteria in their fecal samples, and these changes were directly associated with their cognitive status. The gut microbiome was not just a bystander. It was actively driving the disease, sending inflammatory signals up through the gut-brain axis, suppressing the neurogenesis the hippocampus needs to maintain memory, and accelerating the metabolic collapse that the rest of the evidence points to as Alzheimer's true origin. Now here is where Reishi becomes even more remarkable, because Reishi doesn't just work on the brain directly. Reishi polysaccharides can remodel gut microbiota structure, promote the production of beneficial metabolites, and transmit signals to the central nervous system through the gut-brain axis, markedly alleviating oxidative stress in the hippocampus and improving aging-related cognitive impairment. In other words, Reishi works where the newest science says Alzheimer's actually starts, by restoring the microbial environment that we now know can transmit the disease from one organism to another. And then there is the third angle which brings everything together, the Bredesen protocol. In 2014, neurologist Dale Bredesen published the results of a multi-target therapeutic program built entirely around the metabolic model of Alzheimer's. Rather than targeting a single molecule, his approach targeted over 36 contributing factors simultaneously. Things like insulin resistance, inflammation, sleep, stress, toxin exposure, hormone levels, and nutrient status. All of it was personalized to each patient. 9 of the first 10 patients improved cognitively within 6 months. 6 had stopped working or were struggling at their jobs at the start, and all 6 had returned to work by the end. A subsequent study of 100 patients showed widespread improvement, increases in hippocampal volume, recovered spelling, improved speech, patients able once again to shop, cook, and use a computer. In 2025, a randomized controlled trial based on Bredesen's framework was published, claiming the first clinical trial success after over 400 failed drug trials. Now, the honest caveat. The earlier case series were descriptive research offering limited evidence. None of the original papers included a methods section, so the protocols could not be independently replicated. Bredesen also has commercial interests in companies offering this protocol, and critics from the Alzheimer's Society maintain his claims are not backed by clinical validation at scale. The 2025 trial is a step forward, but it's not the end destination. But here is what matters for this story. The one natural compound Bredesen specifically included in his protocol for nerve growth factor stimulation was a mushroom. lion's mane mushroom. It was selected because not much else produced the same effect on the protein neurons need to survive and regenerate, nerve growth factor. Reishi was not formally part of his protocol. But when you look at what his protocol was trying to do, reduce inflammation, address insulin resistance, protect mitochondria, restore metabolic balance, and then look at what Reishi's documented mechanisms are, they are almost point for point the same list. So why hasn't this been tested properly? Why, after 2,000 years of use and decades of promising preclinical data, is there still only one small human trial on reishi for Alzheimer's? The answer is that clinical trials are funded primarily by pharmaceutical companies who need a patentable molecule at the end. Reishi is a mushroom, it can't be patented. So there's no financial incentive to run a large-scale, multi-year, randomized controlled trial that would establish clinical proof. The system that produces medical evidence is not designed to investigate compounds that nature invented and that no one owns. This doesn't mean reishi is a cure for Alzheimer's. The human evidence is not there. What it means is that the absence of that evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The question has barely been asked, let alone answered. What reishi represents, viewed honestly, is something that should make us think carefully about how we approach disease. Modern medicine treats Alzheimer's as a discrete entity, a specific disease to attack with a specific drug. But a growing body of evidence suggests it is better understood as what happens when multiple protective systems fail simultaneously over decades, driven by the way we eat, sleep, move, manage our stress, and care for our gut. The plaques and the tangles are the end stage. The metabolic collapse is the root. Reishi evolved over hundreds of millions of years in conditions not unlike those that challenge our own cells, with oxidative stress, pathogen pressure, metabolic constraint, and the need to protect cellular integrity across time. The compounds it developed to survive those pressures speak a biological language that our cells understand, because many of the threats are the same. This is not mysticism, this is convergent evolution. And it may be that a mushroom emperors once searched remote mountains to find has been addressing the right problems all along, while modern medicine, armed with $42 billion and the most sophisticated tools in scientific history, was looking at the wrong ones. Reishi will not cure Alzheimer's. The evidence does not support that claim, and this channel will not make it. But if Alzheimer's is truly a metabolic disease, then supporting those systems with everything available to us, including compounds that have been used safely for thousands of years and are now showing up in the most exciting research in the field, is not alternative medicine. It is first principles medicine. And it starts, perhaps, with a mushroom growing on an old piece of wood in a forest, which is exactly where humans first found it. If this video got you thinking about your own brain health, I put together a 7-day protocol called the Decentralized Brain. It's a practical system for restoring mental clarity, energy, and cognitive resilience using the same first principle thinking we covered today. The link is in the description. And if you want to stay up to date with the latest developments in the world of mycology, psychedelics, and brain health, then sign up to my newsletter, The Spore Report, by clicking the other link in the description. Thanks for watching.